When Modi met Lakshmi Pichai, the moment that touched Sundar's heart, the morning sun rose slowly over Chennai. Soft golden light touched the small garden outside Lakshmi Pichai's modest home. She was watering her plants, lost in thought, when a quiet sound of cars echoed through the street. Neighbors peeked out from windows, confused and curious. The air felt different that day, calm but filled with a strange anticipation. Inside the house, the aroma of filter coffee and jasmine flowers filled the air. Lakshmi, wearing a simple cream sari with a green border, gently placed 2 cups on the table. She didn't know that in just a few minutes, her quiet morning would turn into something the whole nation would talk about. A black car stopped outside. Security officers stepped out. And then the door opened. Prime Minister Narendra Modi walked toward the small gate with his gentle smile, folded his hands and said softly, "Namaste, Amma." For a moment, Lakshmi stood frozen. Her eyes widened in disbelief. She had seen this man on television many times, but never imagined he would stand at her door, greeting her with such warmth and respect. "Prime Minister Ji." "Please, come in," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Modi smiled, removing his sandals before entering the house. "No, Amma. I am not here as a prime minister today. I am here as a son who wanted to meet the mother who raised a son like Sundar Pichai." Tears filled Lakshmi's eyes. She led him inside, still stunned. As they sat at the small wooden table, Modi looked around the humble room. Family photos on the wall, a faded curtain, a shelf filled with books and old trophies. "Your home reminds me of my mother's," Modi said quietly. "Simple but filled with values." Lakshmi smiled softly. "Life teaches us to stay grounded, sir. Sundar never forgot that." Modi looked at her carefully, his eyes gentle. "And that is why I came, Amma. Because the world knows Sundar Pichai as a global leader, but I wanted to meet the woman who taught him humility." The conversation flowed naturally. Modi asked about Sundar's childhood, his struggles, the times when money was tight, and how he dreamed big even when life was small. Lakshmi spoke softly, recalling the nights Sundar studied under a single lamp, his father repairing machines late into the night, and how they always believed education could change a life. As she spoke, Modi listened silently, the sound of birds from the garden mixed with her gentle words. For a few moments, the powerful leader of India sat not as a politician, but as a listener, learning from a mother's wisdom. Then came a pause. Lakshmi looked at Modi and said, "Sir, I have always believed greatness is not about what we achieve, but what we inspire others to do." Modi nodded slowly. "Amma, you have already done that. Your son inspires millions of young Indians to dream beyond boundaries. And that is India's strength. Mothers like you who build values stronger than walls." Tears rolled down Lakshmi's cheeks. She wiped them quietly. "Sundar calls every week," she said with a smile. "He tells me, 'Amma, never stop being simple, because that is what makes life peaceful.'" Modi smiled again. "He learned that from you, and I wanted to tell you, on behalf of every mother in India, thank you." He gently folded his hands again. The room fell silent. For a few seconds, only the ticking clock was heard. Then Modi reached into his pocket and placed a small folded paper on the table. "This is not official, Amma. This is personal. A handwritten note for Sundar. I want you to give it to him when you talk next." Lakshmi's hands trembled as she accepted it. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. The Prime Minister stood up, walked toward the door, and turned back once more. "You know, Amma, India is changing fast. Technology, economy, everything. But no technology can replace the heart of a mother. That is where our true strength lies." As he stepped outside, the sunlight fell gently on both of them. Lakshmi stood at the door watching him leave, her heart full of pride and calmness. When Modi's car disappeared into the distance, she sat back on her chair, looking at the note he left behind. She didn't open it. Instead, she smiled quietly, feeling something deep inside, something she couldn't explain. A few hours later, Sundar called from California. "Amma, how are you?" Lakshmi smiled through her tears. "I am fine, Kanna. But someone came today. Someone who reminded me how far you've come." Sundar laughed softly. "Who, Amma?" "Another neighbor with sweets?" She paused, her voice trembling. "No, Kanna. It was Prime Minister Modi. There was silence on the other end of the line. Sundar couldn't speak. His heart raced. His eyes filled. "Amma," he said finally, his voice breaking. "What did he say?" Lakshmi looked at the small note again. He said something beautiful. He said India's real power lies in its mothers. On the other side of the world, Sundar sat quietly in his office at Google headquarters. His hands covered his face, and for the first time in years, he felt the same warmth he felt as a boy in that small Chennai home. His assistant knocked at the door, asking, "Sir, are you okay?" Sundar looked up with wet eyes and said, "Yes, I just realize what true leadership looks like." That night he called his father. "Appa," he said softly, "today Modi ji met Amma. He reminded me that no matter how far we go, we must always remember where we began." His father said, "That's true, Kana. Roots are what keep the tree standing." Sundar smiled quietly. Outside his window, the California sky was glowing orange with the sunset. Somewhere far away, in India, the same sun had already set, over the home where his story began. And in that moment, two worlds connected by one emotion, respect. This was not a meeting of power. It was a meeting of hearts, and it was just the beginning of a story that would touch millions. The letter that changed everything. The next morning, Lakshmi Pichai sat near the window, holding the small folded note that Modi had left on the table. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, creating golden lines on the floor. Her heart felt heavy and light at the same time. She had seen many mornings in her life, but none felt like this. Her fingers trembled as she slowly opened the letter. It was written in neat handwriting, each word filled with sincerity. "Dear Sundar, India is proud of you, not just for your success, but for your humility. You represent the dreams of millions who believe that knowledge, not privilege, builds greatness. I met your mother today, and in her eyes I saw the strength of India, calm, grounded, and full of love. May you continue to serve humanity with kindness and simplicity. With respect, Narendra Modi." Lakshmi read it again and again, her eyes moist. She folded it carefully, placing it inside a small wooden box where she kept her most precious things. An old photo of Sundar as a child, a few medals, and a tiny clay lamp from his first school prize day. Later that day, Sundar called again. His voice was softer this time, more emotional. "Amma, I couldn't sleep last night. I kept thinking about what you said." Lakshmi smiled. "The Prime Minister's words?" "Yes," Sundar said. "It's not just about meeting him. It's about what it means, that our country values kindness as much as success." Lakshmi nodded. "That's true, Kana. People remember hearts more than headlines." Sundar stayed silent for a while. Then he said something unexpected. "Amma, I want to come home. Not for meetings, not for events, just to see you." Lakshmi's eyes widened. "Really, Kana? After so long?" "Yes, Amma." "I'll come next week. I want to visit the old school, meet the students, and do something special for the children here. Modi ji reminded me that we all must give back to where we began." For the next few days, Lakshmi could barely contain her excitement. She cleaned the small house, changed the old curtains, and arranged the family photos neatly on the wall. The neighbors noticed her glowing smile and asked, "Amma, why so happy?" She replied softly, "My son is coming home." When the news reached the local media, people began whispering, "Sundar Pichai is returning to Chennai. He's visiting his mother's old neighborhood." Schools started preparing banners, and children practiced songs to welcome him, but Lakshmi remained quiet. She didn't care about cameras or attention. She just wanted to hold her son again, like the days when he returned from school with a smile and dust on his shoes. One evening, as she arranged fresh flowers in the living room, she looked at the small portrait of her late husband and said softly, "Our boy is coming home, Appa." He kept his promise. The next morning, the whole street was decorated with Indian flags and marigold garlands. People stood by their gates, smiling with pride. Then, a black car stopped at the corner. Sundar stepped out, wearing a simple white shirt and gray trousers. There was no security, no big announcement, just a man returning to his roots. Lakshmi walked toward him, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Amma," Sundar said, his voice breaking. He bent down and touched her feet. She placed her hand on his head and said, "You didn't change, Kanna. The world may call you a leader, but for me, you are still my little boy." The crowd clapped softly, moved by the sight. Cameras clicked, but Sundar ignored them. He held his mother's hand as they walked inside the small house that once held all his dreams. Inside, he saw the same wooden table, the same clock, the same warmth. "Nothing has changed here," he whispered. Lakshmi smiled. "Only your heart became bigger." Later that evening, as the sun began to set, Sundar sat outside in the garden where he once studied under the yellow streetlight. He looked at the small potted plants his mother had grown and said quietly, "Amma, I forgot how peaceful this feels." She poured him a cup of coffee and sat beside him. "Peace comes from remembering who we are," she said. He nodded. "I met so many leaders, Amma. But Modiji's visit to you taught me something no meeting ever did. He showed me that true respect is not given by position. It's earned through humanity." Lakshmi looked at him with a proud smile. "And you, Kanna, have earned it through your humility." Then, out of nowhere, Sundar took out the letter Modi had written. "Amma, I read it on the flight," he said. "Every line made me realize that I've been chasing success, but I need to build something that gives back to the people who raised me." Lakshmi tilted her head gently. "What do you mean, Kanna?" Sundar looked into the distance. "I want to start a foundation in India, one that supports poor students with access to technology and education. I want to help children who dream like I once did." Lakshmi's eyes filled with tears. "That's beautiful, Kanna. Your father would be so proud." The night grew quiet. Fireflies danced around the garden. The sound of distant prayers filled the air. Sundar whispered, "Amma, I want to name it after you." She gasped. "No, Kanna, it's your work, not mine." But Sundar smiled softly. "No, Amma, it began with you. Your lessons, your love, your strength, they built everything I am today." She held his hand tightly, her eyes shining. "Then make sure it helps every child who dreams, Kanna. That will be my blessing." And just like that, a new dream was born that night, under the same stars that once watched a young boy study with hope. The next day, as the news spread, people across India celebrated. "Sundar Pichai returns to his roots," headlines said. "Plans to empower India's youth." But behind every headline was a quiet truth. This was not just a man giving back to his country. It was a son fulfilling his mother's unspoken wish to use success for kindness. As Lakshmi watched the sunrise again, she whispered softly, "Thank you, Modi ji. Your visit brought my son home, not just to me but to his purpose." And somewhere, far away, the Prime Minister smiled while reading the morning newspaper, feeling the same pride that only a teacher, a parent, or a leader could feel. Because sometimes one small act of respect can awaken 1,000 acts of goodness. The promise to India, the news of Sundar Pichai's visit spread across the nation like fire carried by the wind. TV channels replayed the moment he touched his mother's feet, and social media overflowed with messages about humility, roots, and respect. Young students in schools began talking about Sundar not as a global CEO, but as an Indian son who remembered where he came from. Lakshmi Pichai's small home became a place of quiet attention. People from nearby towns came just to stand outside and look at the house that raised a world leader. But Lakshmi stayed calm, smiling politely, refusing interviews. "It's not about fame," she said gently to a reporter one morning. "It's about love." Meanwhile, Sundar had started his quiet work. After his return to California, he called a special meeting with his team. "I want to create something in India," he said, "not just a center for technology, but a center for dreams." His team listened carefully. "What do you mean, sir?" one asked. "A foundation," Sundar explained, "where young students from small towns, like I once was, can learn coding, design, innovation, and leadership. But it should also teach kindness, humility, and teamwork. I want to name it the Lakshmi Initiative." There was silence in the room. Then one of his colleagues smiled. "Sir, that's beautiful." But Sundar added, "It must start in the same place I grew up, Chennai." The very next week, he flew back to India again, this time quietly, without media noise. He met with local education officials, teachers, and students. At every step, he carried a small notebook, writing down ideas and suggestions. At a small school near his old home, a young girl approached him shyly. "Sir, my father says I can't study computers because it's expensive." Sundar knelt down, smiling gently. "What's your name?" "Meena," she said softly. "Meena," Sundar replied, "never let money decide how big you can dream. Knowledge is free when people share it, and we will make sure you get to learn everything you want." The girl smiled, her eyes shining with hope, and at that moment, Sundar knew what he had to do. He called his mother that evening. "Amma, I've seen what needs to change. Too many children here still don't have access to basic digital learning. I'm going to build free digital learning centers in villages." Lakshmi listened silently, her heart swelling with pride. "That's good, Kanna. But remember, don't just build buildings. Build hearts that believe." Sundar smiled. "Yes, Amma, that's the real goal." As the project began, the government extended its support. Prime Minister Modi personally called Sundar to say, "The nation stands with you, my friend. Let this be a movement for India's future." That call wasn't about politics. It was about vision. Both men shared a simple belief that India's progress would rise from its classrooms, from the hands of children who dared to dream. Soon, construction began in Chennai for the first Lakshmi Learning Center. It wasn't grand or flashy. It was built with open spaces, bright classrooms, solar panels, and walls painted with stories of Indian scientists and thinkers. One afternoon, Sundar visited the site with his mother. The sound of construction echoed through the air. Workers paused and greeted them respectfully. Lakshmi looked at the half-built walls and whispered, "These bricks will carry dreams." Sundar nodded. "And every dream will carry a lesson of kindness." But not everything was easy. Soon, the project faced challenges: funding delays, permit issues, and local bureaucracy. People began to doubt. Newspapers wrote, "Will the Lakshmi Initiative ever be completed?" Sundar stayed calm. "Setbacks are lessons in disguise," he told his team. Late one night, he sat alone at the site, the half-built structure glowing faintly under the moonlight. A worker walked by and asked softly, "Sir, do you really think this will change?" "Things?" Sundar looked up with tired eyes and said, "Yes, because it changed me. And if one life can change, so can 1,000. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Local college students, inspired by Sundar's vision, arrived with paint, brushes, and cleaning tools. "We'll help, sir," they said. "This is for our generation." Soon, volunteers from across Tamil Nadu joined in. Farmers, teachers, and even retired workers offered their time. It became a movement, not a project. Lakshmi watched it all unfold quietly. One evening, she stood by the gate as children walked by, holding notebooks and laughing. She smiled, whispering to herself, "This is how change begins, not with power, but with hearts working together." Weeks later, the first building was completed. On the inauguration day, the sun shone brightly, flags fluttered, and the scent of jasmine filled the air. Students sat in rows, dressed neatly in white. Sundar stood on the small stage beside his mother and Prime Minister Modi, who had come again, this time not to visit, but to honor. As Modi stepped up to the microphone, he said, "This center is more than a building. It is proof that when a son remembers his mother, a nation remembers its soul." Applause echoed through the crowd. Lakshmi wiped a tear as Sundar stepped forward to speak. "This isn't about me," Sundar said softly. "This is about every mother who told her child to never give up. Every teacher who stayed after class to help one more student. Every child who dreams under a dim light but never stops believing. This is India's story." The crowd erupted in cheers. Even Modi clapped with emotion. Lakshmi looked at her son with silent pride, her eyes saying what words could not. As the event ended, Sundar walked toward the first classroom with a small group of children. They gathered around a computer, wide-eyed and excited. He showed them how to code a small animation of the Indian flag waving. The children laughed with joy as the tricolor moved on the screen. Lakshmi stood at the door, watching quietly. She whispered a small prayer of gratitude. But as she turned away, she noticed something strange. A group of men stood outside the gate, whispering among themselves. Their expressions were serious. One of them made a call and nodded silently. Lakshmi didn't know it yet, but something was about to happen. Something that would test their courage, faith, and unity. Because every great story of kindness must face a moment of trial. The storm before the light. The air around the newly built Lakshmi Learning Center was filled with excitement. Children ran in the open courtyard, laughter echoing through the walls painted with bright colors. Teachers prepared lesson plans on computers that still smelled of new plastic. Sundar had returned to California, but his heart stayed behind in Chennai. Every evening he called his mother for updates, and Lakshmi would say softly, "The children are happy, Kana. That is what matters." But one evening, her voice sounded different. Softer. Worried. "Amma, are you okay?" Sundar asked. Lakshmi hesitated. "Some people came today, Kana. They said the land used for the center might not be approved properly. They want us to stop the classes until further notice." Sundar frowned. "What, we went through every legal step?" "How can they say that now?" "They said they'll come again tomorrow with officials," Lakshmi added quietly. "The teachers are scared. The children don't understand what's happening." That night, Sundar couldn't sleep. His mind raced through memories. All the nights he studied under a single bulb. All the dreams he had carried from that same soil. He knew this was not about land or paperwork. It was about resistance to change. When something new rises, something old always tries to stop it. The next morning, as Lakshmi stood outside the gate, a group of men arrived with papers in their hands. One of them, a middle-aged official, said sternly, "We have orders to inspect the premises. There are reports that this property violates zoning rules." Lakshmi folded her hands politely. "Please come inside, sir. We have nothing to hide." Inside, the children watched quietly as men walked around, taking pictures, whispering among themselves. One little boy tugged Lakshmi's sari and asked, "Amma, are they closing our school?" She smiled weakly. "No, Kana. Sometimes grown-ups forget why we build things. They'll remember soon." Later that day, the news spread quickly. Local authority questions legality of the Lakshmi initiative. Headlines began to twist the story. Some with kindness, others with suspicion. From his office in California, Sundar watched the updates on his screen. His chest tightened. The foundation that began with love was now tangled in politics and misunderstanding. He immediately called Modi's office. Within hours, the Prime Minister agreed to meet him virtually. The screen lit up with Modi's calm face. "Sundar," Modi said gently, "I saw the reports. Don't let this shake your purpose. Every good thing faces resistance before it becomes change." "Sir," Sundar replied, his voice tense, "I don't care about the headlines. I care about those children. They've started believing again. I can't let them lose that." Modi nodded slowly. "Then we'll handle it together. But promise me one thing. Keep your message positive. No anger, no blame. Lead with humility, like your mother taught you." "I promise, sir," Sundar said. Meanwhile, in Chennai, Lakshmi gathered the teachers and students under the banyan tree beside the center. "Children," she said softly, "sometimes when light spreads too fast, shadows try to cover it. But we must keep shining. This place will open again soon. Till then, study under this tree, like Sundar once did. The teachers began reading lessons aloud, children writing on their laps, the wind carrying their voices beyond the walls. Passers-by stopped to watch, young minds learning in the open sun, guided by a mother's quiet strength. Within days, the story began to change. Journalists arrived again, this time humbled. They filmed Lakshmi teaching children under the tree, her sari fluttering in the wind, her smile calm despite the struggle. One reporter asked, "Amma, how do you stay so peaceful when they try to shut you down?" Lakshmi replied gently, "Because truth doesn't need anger, only patience. This center was built with love, and love cannot be stopped by papers." Those words went viral. Millions watched the video online, moved by her simplicity. Hashtags filled social media. Stand with Lakshmi and education for all. Messages poured in from across India. Teachers, engineers, students, all offering help. Volunteers began visiting daily, teaching children in shifts, bringing books, even food. Sundar watched all this from afar with tears in his eyes. "Amma," he said in a video call, "you've turned resistance into revolution." Lakshmi laughed softly. "No, Kanna. I only reminded people what education truly means. Not walls, not buildings, but hearts willing to share knowledge." Soon, the Prime Minister intervened personally. The following week, the officials who had questioned the land received direct orders from Delhi, continue all activities. This initiative is to be supported, not stopped. The center reopened officially. When Sundar returned to India, thousands gathered outside to welcome him and Lakshmi. People chanted her name, not as a celebrity, but as a symbol of quiet power. Standing on the stage, Sundar looked at the crowd and said softly, "When I felt lost, my mother became the light. When this center faced darkness, she became its strength. Today I realize India's progress doesn't begin in offices, it begins in homes like hers." Lakshmi stood beside him, smiling through tears. The crowd erupted in applause, chanting her name again. But even as the celebration grew, something unexpected was happening behind the scenes. One of the men who had earlier opposed the project watched from afar, his face pale with regret. He approached Lakshmi after the event. "Amma," he said quietly, his voice trembling, "I was one of the people who tried to stop your center. I thought it was another political move. But today, when I saw those children, I realized I was wrong." Lakshmi looked at him gently. "Everyone makes mistakes, Kanna. Realizing them is the beginning of change." The man's eyes filled with tears. "Please forgive me," she smiled kindly. "Forgiveness is easy, Kanna. Helping others after that is harder, but it's the right way." The man nodded slowly. "Then I'll help. I'll make sure your work never stops again." And he kept his word. Within weeks, more centers began to receive local support. Permissions were cleared faster, and even government schools started sending students to learn technology from Lakshmi's teachers. That night, as Sundar sat beside his mother under the banyan tree, he whispered, "Amma, you've done what even I couldn't. You changed people's hearts." Lakshmi smiled. "No, Kanna. You planted the seed. I just gave it sunlight." They sat there quietly, listening to the sound of children laughing inside the classrooms again. The air felt pure, full of new life, and just as everything seemed to settle, a call came that would once again test their strength. But this time, it wouldn't be about land or permission. It would be about life itself, because destiny was about to turn in a way neither mother nor son could imagine. When the heart trembled, the next morning began like any other. The sun rose softly over Chennai. The children's laughter filled the Lakshmi Learning Center, and the scent of jasmine floated through the courtyard. But for Lakshmi Pichai, the day carried an unseen heaviness. She had been feeling weak for days, though she never told Sundar. Her smile remained the same, her voice calm, but her hands trembled when she held her cup of tea. As she stood near the window watching the students enter their classrooms, her vision blurred slightly. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and told herself it was nothing. "Just tired," she whispered. That afternoon, while helping one of the teachers distribute notebooks, Lakshmi suddenly stopped mid-step. The world spun around her, and before anyone could react, She collapsed gently to the floor. The room went silent for a second. Then chaos followed. Children cried. Teachers ran to her side, calling her name. "Amma, can you hear us?" An ambulance arrived quickly, its siren slicing through the peaceful air. She was rushed to the hospital. The doctors moved swiftly as the students stood outside, holding each other in fear. News reached Sundar within minutes. He was in a board meeting in California when his assistant entered the room whispering, "Sir, it's urgent. It's your mother." His heart sank. He didn't wait to hear the rest. "Book the next flight," he said, his voice breaking. Right now. On the long flight to India, Sundar sat by the window, eyes filled with tears. Every sound of the engine reminded him of her voice, her laughter, her quiet wisdom. He whispered to himself, "Amma, please wait for me." In the hospital, Lakshmi lay still, her face pale but peaceful. Doctors said it was a cardiac issue caused by exhaustion. "She's stable for now," one of them said, "but we'll need to monitor her closely." When Sundar arrived at the hospital the next evening, crowds had already gathered outside. People held candles, praying for her recovery. As soon as he entered the corridor, nurses and visitors moved aside quietly, letting him through. He walked into the room and froze. There she was. The woman who had been his strength through every struggle, lying weak, surrounded by machines. "Amma," he whispered, his voice trembling. Her eyes opened slowly. Even in pain, her lips curved into a faint smile. "You came, Kana. I told them you would." Sundar knelt beside her, holding her hand tightly. "Amma, don't talk. Just rest." But Lakshmi shook her head slightly. "No, Kana, listen, I'm proud of you. What you built here? It's beautiful. But promise me something." "Anything, Amma," Sundar said, tears rolling down his face. "Promise me you'll keep this center alive, even if I'm not here. Don't let it stop. Let it grow like a banyan tree. Roots deep, branches wide." Sundar nodded, unable to speak. Those words went viral. Millions watched the video online, moved by her simplicity. Hashtags filled social media. "Stand with Lakshmi" and "Daksh Education for all." Messages poured in from across India. Teachers, engineers, students, all offering help. Volunteers began visiting daily, teaching children in shifts, bringing books, even food. Sundar watched all this from afar with tears in his eyes. "Amma," he said in a video call, "you've turned resistance into revolution." Lakshmi laughed softly. "No, Kana, I only reminded people what education truly means. Not walls, not buildings, but hearts willing to share knowledge." Soon, the Prime Minister intervened personally. The following week, the officials who had questioned the land received direct orders from Delhi. Continue all activities. This initiative is to be supported, not stopped. The center reopened officially. When Sundar returned to India, thousands gathered outside to welcome him and Lakshmi. People chanted her name, not as a celebrity, but as a symbol of quiet power. Standing on the stage, Sundar looked at the crowd and said softly, "When I felt lost, my mother became the light. When this center faced darkness, she became its strength. Today I realize, India's progress doesn't begin in offices. It begins in homes like hers." Lakshmi stood beside him, smiling through tears. The crowd erupted in applause, chanting her name again. But even as the celebration grew, something unexpected was happening behind the scenes. One of the men who had earlier opposed the project watched from afar, his face pale with regret. He approached Lakshmi after the event. "Amma," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "I was one of the people who tried to stop your center. I thought it was another political move. But today, when I saw those children, I realized I was wrong." Lakshmi looked at him gently. "Everyone makes mistakes, Kana. Realizing them is the beginning of change." The man's eyes filled with tears. "Please forgive me." She smiled kindly. "Forgiveness is easy, Kana. Helping others after that is harder, but it's the right way." The man nodded slowly. "Then I'll help. I'll make sure your work never stops again." and he kept his word. Within weeks, more centers began to receive local support, permissions were cleared faster, and even government schools started sending students to learn technology from Lakshmi's teachers. That night, as Sundar sat beside his mother under the banyan tree, he whispered, "Amma, you've done what even I couldn't. You changed people's hearts." Lakshmi smiled. "No, Kana. You planted the seed. I just gave it sunlight." They sat there quietly, listening to the sound of children laughing inside the classrooms again. The air felt pure, full of new life. And just as everything seemed to settle, a call came that would once again test their strength. But this time, it wouldn't be about land or permission. It would be about life itself, because destiny was about to turn in a way neither mother nor son could imagine. When the heart trembled, the next morning began like any other. The sun rose softly over Chennai. The children's laughter filled the Lakshmi Learning Center, and the scent of jasmine floated through the courtyard. But for Lakshmi Pichai, the day carried an unseen heaviness. She had been feeling weak for days, though she never told Sundar. Her smile remained the same, her voice calm, but her hands trembled when she held her cup of tea. As she stood near, the window watching the students enter their classrooms, her vision blurred slightly. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and told herself it was nothing. "Just tired," she whispered. That afternoon, while helping one of the teachers distribute notebooks, Lakshmi suddenly stopped mid-step. The world spun around her, and before anyone could react, she collapsed gently to the floor. The room went silent for a second, then chaos followed. Children cried, teachers ran to her side, calling her name. "Amma, can you hear us?" An ambulance arrived quickly, its siren slicing through the peaceful air. She was rushed to the hospital. The doctors moved swiftly as the students stood outside, holding each other in fear. News reached Sundar within minutes. He was in a board meeting in California when his assistant entered the room, whispering, "Sir, it's urgent. It's your mother." His heart sank. He didn't wait to hear the rest. "Book the next flight," he said, his voice breaking. "Right now." On the long flight to India, Sundar sat by the window, eyes filled with tears. Every sound of the engine reminded him of her voice, her laughter, her quiet wisdom. He whispered to himself, "Amma, please wait for me." In the hospital, Lakshmi lay still, her face pale but peaceful. Doctors said it was a cardiac issue caused by exhaustion. "She's stable for now," one of them said, "but we'll need to monitor her closely." When Sundar arrived at the hospital the next evening, crowds had already gathered outside. People held candles, praying for her recovery. As soon as he entered the corridor, nurses and visitors moved aside quietly, letting him through. He walked into the room and froze. There she was, the woman who had been his strength through every struggle, lying weak, surrounded by machines. "Amma," he whispered, his voice trembling. Her eyes opened slowly. Even in pain, her lips curved into a faint smile. "You came, Kana. I told them you would." Sundar knelt beside her, holding her hand tightly. "Amma, don't talk, just rest." But Lakshmi shook her head slightly. "No, Kana, listen, I'm proud of you. What you built here, it's beautiful, but promise me something." "Anything, Amma," Sundar said, tears rolling down his face. "Promise me you'll keep this center alive, even if I'm not here. Don't let it stop. Let it grow like a banyan tree, roots deep, branches wide." Sundar nodded, unable to speak. That night, he refused to leave her side. He sat by her bed, holding her hand, listening to the rhythmic sound of the heart monitor. Memories flooded back. The smell of home-cooked food, the sound of her voice waking him for school, her hands adjusting his shirt before every exam. At dawn, she woke again and saw him still sitting there. "You didn't sleep?" she asked softly. He smiled weakly. "How can I sleep when my world is here?" She reached out with trembling fingers and touched his cheek. "You've always been strong, Kana, But remember, real strength is not in power. It's in peace. For the next few days, people across India prayed for her recovery. Schools held special assemblies. Children drew cards with messages like, "Get well soon, Amma Lakshmi." Her story had become India's story, the mother behind one of its proudest sons. Then, one morning, the doctors walked in with cautious smiles. "She's responding well," they said. "Her heart is healing." Sundar exhaled deeply, closing his eyes in relief. "Thank you," he whispered. But Lakshmi's recovery took time. Even as her body weakened, her spirit remained strong. From her hospital bed, she asked about the children. "Are the classes running?" "Yes, Amma," Sundar said. "Every day. The teachers are doing amazing work." She smiled faintly. "Good. Never let them stop learning. Knowledge heals the world." A week later, when she was finally allowed to go home, the entire neighborhood lined the street with flowers and prayers. As the car stopped near her house, children from the Yabosaki Learning Center ran forward, shouting, "Welcome back, Amma!" Lakshmi's eyes filled with tears as she stepped out holding Sundar's arm. She looked at the faces around her, children, teachers, neighbors, strangers, all smiling with love. "See, Kana," she whispered. "This is the power of kindness. It always returns." Sundar looked at her, realizing something deeper. His mother had not only inspired him, but had united people in a way he never could. That evening, as the sun set, he stood beside her in the garden. She was weaker now, but her eyes sparkled like always. "Amma," he said softly, "I want to do something in your honor. Not just for education, but for mothers like you, who raise their children with courage even when life is hard." Lakshmi smiled gently. "What will you call it?" He paused, thinking deeply. "The Amma Initiative. Programs to support rural women, to give them digital training and small business opportunities." Lakshmi's eyes glowed with pride. "Then I can go peacefully one day, knowing you are still serving others." "Don't say that," Sundar whispered, tears in his eyes. "You're not going anywhere." She smiled knowingly. "Life moves like the wind, Kana, but love stays forever." As night fell, the garden lights shimmered softly. Sundar watched her sitting in her chair, the faint sound of children laughing from the center drifting through the air. He knew time was fragile, but moments like this would stay in his heart forever. Days passed peacefully until one evening when the sky turned gray with unexpected rain. Lakshmi was resting inside when she called softly, "Kana, come sit beside me." He walked over quickly. She looked tired but calm. "Do you remember that old street lamp outside our house where you used to study?" Sundar smiled through his tears. "How could I forget, Amma? That's where it all began." Lakshmi looked at him lovingly. "Then promise me one thing. Whenever you see a child struggling in the dark, be their light." "I promise, Amma," he said, his voice trembling. She closed her eyes gently, whispering, "Good boy." The sound of rain filled the room. Her breathing slowed, then steadied again. Sundar sat there, holding her hand, unaware that the promise he just made would become the most meaningful vow of his life. Because life was about to test that promise in a way he could never imagine. The light that never faded. The night was quiet. Only the soft rhythm of rain echoed against the window. Sundar sat by his mother's side, her hand still warm in his. She had fallen asleep peacefully, the faint rise and fall of her chest matching the distant sound of thunder. Outside, the garden lights shimmered through the drizzle, casting golden reflections on the floor. Hours passed. Sundar didn't move. He watched her face, memorizing every wrinkle, every expression that had once comforted him as a child. He whispered softly, "Amma, I'll keep your promise. I'll be the light for others." But just before dawn, The peace broke into silence. The nurse entered quietly, checking Lakshmi's pulse. She paused, her eyes turning moist. Sundar stood up immediately. "What happened?" he asked, his voice trembling. The nurse looked down and whispered, "She's gone, sir." Those words pierced through him like lightning. Sundar fell to his knees beside the bed, holding her hand tightly, unable to believe what he was hearing. "No, Amma, please." "You promised to rest, not to leave." His voice cracked as tears streamed down his face, but Lakshmi's face remained calm. Her lips curved into a faint smile, as if she had left the world exactly the way she lived in it. Peacefully, gracefully, without pain. The next few hours blurred. Neighbors gathered outside the house, the same people who once came for her blessings, now standing in silence. Across India, news spread rapidly. Lakshmi Pichai, mother of Sundar Pichai, passes away peacefully at home. Millions of messages poured in. Prime Minister Modi called personally, his voice filled with empathy. "Sundar, the whole nation stands with you." Your mother's strength was India's pride. Her legacy will live forever. Sundar could barely reply. "Thank you, sir," he said quietly. "She taught me everything, even how to face this moment." The next day, the funeral took place in their ancestral home. The courtyard was covered in flowers, marigolds and jasmine woven together, their fragrance blending with the smell of rain and earth. Sundar lit the ceremonial lamp beside her, whispering, "You gave me light, Amma. Now it's my turn to keep it burning." As the flames rose, people wept softly. But Sundar didn't speak. He stood still, his eyes reflecting the firelight. For him, it wasn't just a goodbye, it was a beginning of a lifelong promise. After the ceremony, when everyone had left, he walked alone to the Lakshmi Learning Center. The classrooms were empty, the chairs neatly arranged, the chalk still fresh on the board. He walked to the corner where his mother used to sit and teach. Her chair was still there, the cushion slightly indented as if waiting for her to return. He sat down quietly, looking around. The room smelled faintly of sandalwood and memories. He whispered, "You're still here, Amma. In every wall, in every word, in every child." Then he made a decision, one that would carry her spirit far beyond the walls of that small center. A month later, at a global technology summit in New Delhi, Sundar stood on stage before thousands of people. His voice was calm but filled with emotion. "A few weeks ago," he began, "I lost my mother. She wasn't a politician or a celebrity or a businesswoman, but she built something far greater than any of us. She built values. And those values built me." The hall was silent. He continued, "My mother believed that kindness is the highest form of intelligence. So today, I'm announcing the expansion of the Lakshmi Initiative into a national program, Amma for India, a movement that will educate, empower and support women across rural India, giving them the skills, tools, and confidence to change their families' futures." The audience erupted in applause. Modi, seated in the front row, stood up and clapped slowly, his eyes filled with pride. "This is not a tribute," Sundar said softly. "This is a continuation, because when a mother's love touches the world, it never fades." Over the next few months, Amma for India became a beacon of hope. Hundreds of learning centers opened in small towns and villages. Mothers learned digital literacy, started small online businesses, and helped their children study from home. The logo of the initiative was simple, a pair of hands holding a glowing lamp, just like Lakshmi once held the light of her home. One evening, as Sundar returned to Chennai for the inauguration of the largest center yet, he visited his mother's old garden. The same street lamp that once guided his studies still stood there, its yellow glow flickering softly. He looked at it, smiling through tears. "You kept shining, Amma," he whispered. A young girl, no older than 10, came running toward him. She was holding a tablet in her hands. "Sir, look what I made," she said, showing him a small animation, a mother lighting a lamp, and the light spreading across India. Sundar knelt down, smiling warmly. "Did you make this yourself?" The girl nodded proudly. "Yes, sir. We made it in our Amma center. Our teacher said this light represents you and your mother." He felt a lump in his throat. No, Kana, he said softly. This light represents you, and every child who dares to dream. The girl grinned. Amma said you'll come back one day. Sundar looked up at the sky where the first stars had begun to appear. And she was right, he whispered. Later that night, he walked through the classrooms filled with laughter and energy. Everywhere he looked, he saw his mother's spirit, in the kindness of the teachers, the curiosity of the students, and the unity of hearts that believed in something bigger than themselves. He turned off the lights one by one, except for one small lamp that sat on the main desk, the same lamp he had lit at her funeral. He stood there silently, watching its soft glow. You didn't just raise a son, Amma, he whispered. You raised a movement, and with that he smiled. Not the smile of a leader, but of a child who had finally understood the meaning of everything she ever taught him. Because in the end, Lakshmi Pichai didn't just give India a visionary son. She gave the world a timeless message, that humility is stronger than power, and love lasts longer than life. And somewhere, beyond the stars, a mother smiled, watching her promise live on through every child who now studied under a light that would never go out. The legacy that touched the world years passed, but the warmth of that story never faded. What began as a meeting between a leader and a mother had grown into something far beyond imagination. The Lakshmi Initiative and Amma for India had spread across the country. In small villages, on dusty roads, in mountain towns and coastal schools, the name Lakshmi Amma had become a symbol of strength, compassion, and hope. Children who once studied under dim lights now learned coding, robotics, and design on bright screens. Mothers who had never touched a computer were now teaching others how to use technology for small businesses. And in every classroom, a small lamp burned beside a photo of Lakshmi Pichai, a reminder that greatness is born from humility. Sundar watched all this unfold quietly, not as a CEO, but as a son fulfilling his promise. Every year, he returned to Chennai to visit the first learning center. He never came with cameras or crowds, only with flowers and silence. He would sit under the old banyan tree, where his mother once taught children when the center was shut down, and whisper, "We did it, Amma." One such visit happened on a warm summer morning. As Sundar arrived at the center, he saw something that took his breath away. Dozens of children were gathered in the courtyard, performing a play titled The Story of Amma Lakshmi. They wore simple costumes, one child dressed as Modi, another as Sundar, and an elderly girl as Lakshmi Amma. The play showed the story of her life, her simplicity, her struggles, and how one meeting of respect had changed everything. The children spoke with innocence and emotion, their voices filled with admiration. And when the play ended, the little girl playing Lakshmi said softly, "One mother can change a family, but a kind mother can change a nation." The audience stood and clapped, their eyes wet. Sundar couldn't stop his tears. He walked to the stage, knelt beside the children, and said, "You've told her story better than I ever could. Thank you." A small boy tugged his hand and asked, "Sir, was she really that kind?" Sundar smiled gently. "Yes, Kana. She was even kinder than that." After the event, Sundar visited the garden where his mother's favorite flowers bloomed, white jasmine and red hibiscus. He placed a garland beside the stone plaque that read, "In memory of Lakshmi Pichai, the light behind a million dreams." As he sat there, he heard footsteps. Prime Minister Modi, now older but still carrying the same calm presence, walked toward him. They greeted each other warmly. "Sundar," Modi said softly, "I told you once that India's true power lies in its mothers. Today, your Amma proved it right." Sundar nodded, his eyes filled with emotion. "Sir, when you visited her that day, I didn't realize what it would mean." "You didn't just honor my mother. You reminded every son and daughter in India to never forget their roots." Modi placed a hand on his shoulder. "She taught us that progress without humanity is empty. And through your work, she still teaches us." They both stood silently, watching the children play in the garden nearby. The sound of laughter filled the air, the same sound that once comforted Lakshmi during her last days. Later that evening, Sundar addressed a gathering of students and teachers. My mother used to say that kindness is not something we choose when we have time. It's something we live by, even when life is hard. That's how we build a better world. He paused, looking around at the faces before him, bright, young, full of hope. You don't need to be a CEO or a prime minister to make a difference. You just need to care. If you do that, the world will change. The audience erupted in applause. Many of the students there were the first in their families to attend school, thanks to the Amma initiative. Some of them would later go on to become engineers, teachers, artists, and leaders, all carrying forward the light she had left behind. As time passed, Sundar began to write a book, not about technology, but about life. It was titled The Lamp and the Mother. It told the story of Lakshmi Pichai, the lessons she taught him, and how one act of kindness from Prime Minister Modi had set in motion a movement that inspired millions. The book became a worldwide phenomenon. It was translated into dozens of languages and read by students in schools from India to America. People called it a story that heals hearts. In every interview, Sundar said the same words. This isn't my story. It's my Amma's. Years later, at a global summit in Delhi, a young woman took the stage. She was one of the first students from the original Lakshmi Learning Center. With confidence in her eyes, she said, I am here today because one man kept his mother's promise. In the audience, Sundar smiled quietly, his eyes wet once again. Beside him sat Modi, who leaned closer and whispered, This is your real achievement, Sundar. Not what you built, but who you inspired. The hall filled with applause. Sundar stood, his heart full, and looked up toward the ceiling as if speaking to someone far away. Amma, he whispered. They're walking the path you showed me. And as he walked off the stage, the lights dimmed slightly, leaving a single spotlight glowing on the backdrop, an image of a lamp surrounded by small hands reaching toward its light. It was no longer just a story about a mother and her son. It had become a symbol of India's heart, of humility that could move leaders, kindness that could unite strangers, and faith that could turn pain into purpose. As the years went on, children still learned under those lamps, mothers still taught in those centers, and every evening when the sun dipped below the horizon, the lamps of Amma for India lit up one by one, across cities, towns, and villages, glowing like a constellation of love stretching across the nation, and somewhere beyond the stars, Lakshmi Pichai watched with a smile, proud of the legacy that began with one small home, one meeting of respect, and one promise that never died.